Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about if the red Komodo is worth it when it comes to shooting weddings. I've received a few comments on my channel, on other videos, just in regards to wedding videos and what it actually looks like to shoot weddings on a cinema camera such as the red Komodo. And so today I just wanted to break down a little bit of what that looks like. I own the red Komodo. I have used the red Komodo on both commercial shoots, wedding shoots, event shoots, and basically every kind of shoot that you can think of, I have tried this thing on. And so I just want to basically communicate and relay to you what my experience has been in that scenario of shooting weddings, if I think it's realistic or if I think it is overkill, what the positives and the negatives are to using it. And so I think it's important to bear in mind that with a wedding shoot, it's a little bit different than almost any kind of other shoot, whether it comes to commercial corporate shoots or if it's a narrative shoot. In both of those scenarios, you kind of have the luxury of having a little bit more time on your side. And maybe not in every sense, but in the sense of when you're there to get a shot, you're there to get that specific shot. If it's a corporate shoot, you know, you kind of have your shot list, you know what you're supposed to get. You have your narrative pieces that you're putting a little bit more time into, making sure that you light it properly, all of that. Within, you know, if you have a 30-second video or a 10-second video or a, 3-minute video, you tend to have less shots within that space than you would with a wedding film. And even just a wedding film tends to be a little bit longer than, say, a commercial would be. And so you just naturally, there will be more shots that you need to get, and within a tight timeline of the wedding day. And there's a mass variety of shots. You're maybe not even going to use all the shots that you get, in the edit, but it's your job to basically capture what's happening on that day. And so there's a lot of different things that you need to capture, as well as not everyone there is just there to create a video or a film. And so, you have a couple that's wanting to spend time with their friends and family. You have a photographer that's trying to take up some of the time. There's obviously going to be some other questions or, emergencies, so to speak, that come up that take the couple's attention. And so it's not like everyone there is there only to make a film or make a commercial or a narrative piece. And so you kind of need to work with the time that you have, which means that for each shot, you have a substantially less amount of time for each shot than you would in different scenarios. And so that means that you have to work fast, you need to work efficiently, and you need to be pretty thought through on what shots are important, what shots aren't. And then you also just need to be able to work very quickly with the circumstances that you're dealt when it comes to lighting, composition, the space that you're in. You just need to basically, when you're shooting weddings, you need to know how to make the most of situations that you're in very, very fast and efficiently. And so everything in this video is going to be kind of painted under that umbrella of weddings with that in mind. That's quite run and gun. It's very much working with the circumstances that you're dealt. And so there are 4 different factors that I want to talk about in whether the Komodo as a camera is worth it when shooting weddings. So factor number 1 is exactly what we were just kind of talking about of, can this camera work in run and gun situations? I would say that the Komodo is both positive and negative in this category. I think there's things that are going for it, which really make it easy to be run and gun. And then I think there are things that make it a little harder to be run and gun with this particular camera. So the first thing is that I feel like having this camera has actually made shooting handheld much more realistic for me. In the past, shooting weddings, everything would have to be stabilized because you're using DSLRs, unless, I'm using something like the GH5 that has very, very good in-body stabilization. But even then, it's fake. It doesn't look that natural. The in-body stabilization acts more of a tripod than it does, actually having the movement, but just having it a little bit more leveled out. And so I found that using the Komodo, because of, first off, the global shutter, which makes handheld look quite natural and amazing. You don't have any issues with having a rolling shutter, as well as just having a camera that has more weight to it, that, once you rig it out, it's a bit of a bigger form factor than a DSLR. And so what that does is it evens out that motion. And I have other videos where I talk about this, but basically having that extra weight, having the global shutter has made using this camera a lot more practical for handheld situations, and I found that I'm able to use that footage where when I would do handheld with DSLRs, I would look at the footage and it just wouldn't be something that I would end up putting in the final product. And so I would always be using gimbals or tripods or monopods or, you name it, to stabilize the footage. But with this, I can just grab the camera and grab a shot very quickly. So one, that's made it more run and gun in the sense of I can just grab shots quite quickly at a wedding. And at a wedding, sometimes that is very, very important. You want to be able to pick the camera up, nail the shot and have it ready to go within a matter of seconds with your shot lined up. Sometimes that's harder to do when you're flying on a gimbal or when you have to move a tripod around or what have you. And so it's been really helpful in that scenario. I find that I can get a lot more high quality shots in a shorter amount of time. The flip side of that is that because this camera needs to be built out a little bit more, it's harder to change your setup with this camera on the fly. And so how that comes out in a wedding is sometimes there's times that I do want to be handheld or I don't need as much, big movements, but there are those times as well where I want to be running on a gimbal. And that presents a little bit of a challenge because when it comes to the RED in comparison to DSLRs that I've used in the past, there's just more steps to transfer it from being handheld to gimbal. When you're using a DSLR, it's pretty much as simple as sliding the camera off the gimbal with the base plate and either popping it on a tripod with that same base plate, or you just hold the camera right away with that. There's not much of a shift. Whereas with the Komodo, every time that I switch it, between being handheld and going on a gimbal, I have to take off the outrigger handle because that doesn't fit on the gimbal. I need to unplug the SDI cable, the Red Komodo control cable. I need to take the monitor off of it. I need to then, put the camera on the gimbal. I need to change the wiring over. I need to add the monitor onto the gimbal itself and mount that. And then finally I can power up the gimbal and I'm ready to go, which goes from being able to switch in a matter of seconds to now a matter of minutes. And when you're dealing with a wedding, sometimes that is not fast enough. And so I've found that my solution to that has been to pick my moments. I've gotten to the point now where I know weddings pretty well. I know them well enough that I can kind of select the moments in the day that I want to be handheld and the moments that I want to be on a gimbal, and that'll know that I'll have enough time to transition my camera setup between that. And so it's as simple as that. You just need to kind of know what you're working with. I think if you're new to shooting weddings, I don't know why you would be shooting on a Red Komodo anyway. But if you're a little bit more experienced, hopefully you also kind of know when those moments are and how you like to shoot weddings. And so you can just kind of plan for that. For me, it's been prep, even in the ceremony. I'm usually flying handheld, and then during the photo shoot is when I switch over to the gimbal and get those nice moving shots, those nice smooth shots. And then that actually I've found is great in the edit. You have an option of both to work with. You have your handheld shots, you have your gimbal shots, and you can kind of cut nicely between them. And I find that works a lot better from a cutting perspective than having, all these locked off tripod shots that I used to get. It would either be gimbal or tripod, and when you're going from static to moving, sometimes it doesn't transition the best. And so having more handheld content is good because there's still that movement in there, and then that transitions to a moving gimbal shot much easier, in my personal opinion. Now, another aspect of using the Red Komodo is the boot up time, and this affects being able to be run and gun as well. It takes 30 seconds to turn this camera on, and so when you're in a situation where you need to quickly pull the camera out, boot that camera up and get the shot, it's not immediate. You could be in a situation where you turn the camera on and you're waiting 30 seconds while that moment is passing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so what I've learned to do is just leave the camera on in scenarios where I know I might have to grab that camera. And again, this just comes with experience. This comes from shooting a number of weddings, knowing the typical format for weddings, when are the times during a wedding where you need to be grabbing shots, when are the times that you don't. And then with that, I just have the camera powered off for times that I know there's nothing for me to grab anyway that could come up. But during, you know, times in the reception, I'll just leave the camera on because I know that I might have to get the entrance or the cake cutting or dancing might be coming up. And I might need to shift gears quite quickly. And I found that that's actually not too bad. That's not too unrealistic with the Komodo. With 4 batteries, that typically will last me more than the entire day, and I don't have to recharge anything or anything like that. And so I'm pretty free to just leave the camera on with 4 batteries. Maybe not the entire day, but through some pretty significant sections of the day, I can leave the camera booted up and I won't have a problem when it comes to batteries. It will last the entire time, and I don't have to be worried about that. Another piece of being in run and gun situations is that you don't always get to control the lighting. Luckily with the crew that I typically shoot weddings with, we have an assistant that's able to help us out with lighting. And so we're able to have them, you know, hold diffusers or reflectors or set up an LED panel for us or what have you, which is very, very helpful. But a lot of the time in the weddings, you don't have that luxury. And so having a camera with a higher dynamic range really makes life easier when you're having to work with basically natural light or interior, you know, incandescent lights. And so I've found this really, really helpful working with the Komodo because of that higher dynamic range where, you know, when I have them lit by a window or, you know, I just have them outside, the shots come out a whole lot better than if I was just using a DSLR with a lower dynamic range. And that's not to say you can't get good images with DSLRs, but it just takes more work. You have to be more careful with your lighting. You have to be a lot more calculated with, you know, where you're shooting, making sure that you're always in shade, making, you know, you have to kind of make these calls, and sometimes that's not actually the right shot or the right framing that you want to get. And having a camera with a higher dynamic range just gives you more options to still get high quality footage in not the best lighting scenarios, or it doesn't take as much to make those lighting scenarios look good. And so I'd say that is a pretty big factor when it comes to going quickly on a wedding. If you don't have someone there to help manipulate or manufacture lighting for you while you're getting a shot, then you have to set it up yourself. You have to find ways to light those scenes, and that takes time away from you actually getting the shots. And so you just won't end up with either you won't have as good quality footage, or you will have far less good quality footage because you had to spend more time making it good quality. So the Komodo really shines in this area of just leveling out the areas of the highlights and shadows in your image and just putting things more in a natural ballpark instead of having, you know, your highlights look absolutely nuclear and blown out and your shadows just absolutely crushed and no information there. Just levels everything out, and it looks so cinematic and so great right out of camera. Even if you don't have lights to work with, it still looks really, really, really good. Obviously light when you can. You don't want to just leave it there with the Komodo if you have the option to make it even better by using lighting modifiers and etc. But it does give you that leg up right out of the gate. But the area that it doesn't do as well in is low light. And so that's a piece to consider, is when it gets later in the day and you don't have the sun out or as many natural lights to work with, you have to add your own lighting in. It's not really going to cut it to boost the ISO on the Komodo. Reds are not built for low light. They're just not. They're not a Sony. And so when you crank that ISO, your image is going to fall apart really quick. The Komodo, I think the image, like, almost nothing can beat it in this category of camera right now when it comes to image. But the second you start boosting that ISO, that image falls apart, and other cameras are definitely going to beat it. And so what you need to do is compensate for that. You need to add light and make sure that you stay within that comfortable ISO range of the camera. And so what I do is I just bring some LED panels, and typically when you're getting to that stage of the day, that later section of the day, what's left is really, you know, your dances. You have maybe a bouquet toss or a garter toss. And most of that's happening around the same area of the dance floor. And And so I'll just set up 2 LED panels or even a LED panel, backlighting the dance floor from where I'm shooting. And that usually is enough light added in to keep that camera in a comfortable range. And so my shots turn out, you know, looking clean. I don't have any digital noise added into it, and it looks great. And that's also a good practice to get into anyway. When you start boosting your ISO, yeah, okay, you might get a cleaner image out of it, but it doesn't change where the light's coming from or the color of light or the quality of light. And so it's a good habit. If you're not getting light from the sun, which is a pretty good natural light source, then you end up getting your image is lit by light sources that you don't want to light your image anyway, whether it be indoor incandescents or those, you know, hanging Edison ball, like that's not what you want to be the primary source lighting your image. They're just not good quality lights. And so you want to bring your own lighting in those scenarios and have that be the primary lighting, the primary light source for the subjects that you have in frame. Factor number 2 is storage space. When I was first considering getting the Red Komodo, this is one of the questions that I had in my mind of will I be able to use the Komodo on weddings or not, is just how much storage space it eats up. And I was looking at, you know, I've worked with raw footage before, and I know that it is huge, it's massive. And so I was a little, you know, scared of what that would look like when it comes to a wedding. You know, typically when I've, you know, shot Red, it's for a very specific scenario. When you're working with raw files, it's for a commercial shoot, something where you have a select number of shots and every, you know, second of your footage really counts and matters. Whereas for a wedding, you are calculated with what you get, but there's also a lot of content that you need to get. And you're pressing record quite a few times during that day. And so I was like, okay, if you're shooting raw footage, that's gonna get eaten up pretty quickly. Like a 512 gigabyte card is not gonna last you very long. But when I got the Komodo and started playing around with the ProRes settings, I started to realize that, hey, this is actually gonna be pretty usable for weddings. The ProRes on the Komodo is amazing. You know, you still get really high level of data on your files. The dynamic range is still there. The color science is still there. You just don't get as much flexibility in post when it comes to, you know, changing your highlight roll off or your ISO or white balance settings like that. But as long as you know, pretty much nail that, which you would have to do with any other camera anyway, then you're okay. And so I've started using ProRes a lot for weddings, and even when you're shooting 4K, you can pretty much but you can pretty much last the whole day shooting 4K ProRes, and it'll all fit onto your 512 gigabyte card. And so that was pretty encouraging for me. I started doing that, and that's what I've been shooting a lot of stuff in. And not every wedding I'm shooting 4K, and so it's even better when you're shooting 2K or HD. When you're shooting HD, you know, if you're shooting 24 frames, that's gonna last you pretty much like 10 hours, or 10 or 11 hours, I think it is. And so that's pretty good. Like if you're rolling the entire day at a wedding, you would still, you know, have enough room, which you're not going to be doing. And so I felt pretty safe about that. And that's the process that I've been doing now. And I found that actually the amount of space that I'm taking up when I'm using those formats on the Komodo is actually pretty similar to what I would have, you know, had if I was shooting on my GH5s or a different camera. This has been great too, because ProRes is so easy to edit with. You literally just, you know, transfer it onto your computer and it's ready to edit. You don't have to encode anything. You don't have to proxy. You can just edit straight on the computer. Even if it's in 4K ProRes, it's like butter. I can play it back, I can edit with it, and I have no issues with playback at all. And so that is incredible. For a wedding, you have to be pretty efficient. There's a lot of work that goes into editing a wedding, and so you have to be pretty fast at it. And so if you're having to proxy, if you're having to, you know, encode your footage into something else, it's not practical for a wedding. You have to have something that's ready to go right away. And so I've found that using the Komodo makes this way more realistic and way more tangible to use higher resolutions when need be, without having to go and proxy all that footage off. The third factor is slow motion. Now, I did a video a little while ago about how slow motion is overused, and I still stand by that. Slow motion absolutely is overused, and you want to, especially with wedding films, I think people sometimes fall in the trap of only using slow motion with their B-roll, but you want to use both. You want to use 24, you want to use 60 or 120 or whatever that is, to mix it up. And they're different tools for storytelling. It's not like one is good and one is bad. They're just different tools, and so you need to know when and where to use each. But with that said, I think it is a really good option to have slow motion for weddings. And so that was a bit of a concern when I was looking at the Komodo of, every time that you go into, these higher frame rates, you're cropping in on the sensor. It's not just you getting a lower resolution, but it's actually you have a crop. It will go into the image when you go to 4K, when you go to 2K, when you go to 1080, that image is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and you're using less of the sensor. And so that was a problem. I don't want to shoot that. There's a reason that you get a Super 35 sensor, and it's not to, have a Micro Four Thirds sensor basically when it comes to the crop after the fact. And so that was a bit of a concern, but then I realized, and I made a video on this before, is that there's this setting when you go in widescreen on the Komodo, and when you go widescreen, you can go up to 50 frames per second. And so for me, that was enough slow motion for weddings. I don't need 120. I don't necessarily need 60. 50 is very, very close to 60, and it does the job. And so I was more than happy with that. And all the weddings that I edit tend to be widescreen anyway. And so this was actually perfect. It's less work for me in post to, re-crop all my frames and, having to, change my frame size. It's just already done for me. And so that was actually a win, shooting in widescreen and then also getting that 50 frames. And what I tend to do for weddings is shoot all my long form and narrative content at 24 frames, and then anything that is B-roll, I shoot at 50 frames so that I have the option of having it in slow motion in the edit, but I can also just speed it back up and have it at 24. And so that's typically how I shoot weddings, and I'll get into that a little bit in this next factor, which is scratch audio. Now, this is a thing with the Red Komodo, and I don't know why they have this. I think it would be pretty easy. I mean, I'm saying this and I have no idea, but I feel like it would be pretty easy to add this in, would be on the Komodo, when you're shooting anything over 24 frames, it does not record audio. And so only when you're shooting at 24 frames do you have scratch audio to work with. Otherwise, you only have a video file and no audio file. And so when it comes to syncing footage, this is an issue. Like if you shot the ceremony at 60 or 50 frames accidentally, you wouldn't have any scratch audio to refer to when you're syncing your footage in post. And so you have to do everything by eye, which if you've ever done that before, it is a complete nightmare unless you're slating it and had some sort of visual reference for it or had a clap at the beginning or something like that. But when you're shooting a ceremony, you usually don't have that. And so you're just trying to sync everything based on, people's lips moving or, someone walking at the ceremony, and you're trying to find those points and then visually sync them up and then check later on to see if it's still in sync or if you made a mistake. And it's just it's a headache. And so I wish they would just add in being able to, even at 50 frames, just to have audio recorded. I don't know why that's not included right now. So Red, if you could include that in a firmware update, that would be much appreciated. That would be a huge favor, a huge feature to be able to have in there. But right now it doesn't have that. And so basically I just pick my battles. I shoot, ceremony, speeches, cake cutting, like anything that I might be using audio from, I just shoot in 24 and I'm okay with it. And then anything that I know that is gonna be more B-roll, like the photo shoot, you're not gonna be using audio from that. So I shoot all of that in 50 frames. And so you just have to pick your battles, but you gotta be careful, because if you make a mistake and you're recording in the wrong frame rate, you're gonna be creating a lot of extra work for yourself in post, or some headaches. If you don't have the audio at all and you're relying on having that, scratch audio, then you won't have it, and there's nothing you can do about that. And so just be careful with that. Just you know, before you go and shoot a wedding, play around with it, make sure that you practice a little bit and that you're just very conscious of it during the day, just which frame rate you're in. Maybe have 24 as the default and then just pick your moments to be in 50. Do not default to 50 because that could cause some issues. So those are the 4 factors that I wanted to talk about when it comes to using the Komodo shooting weddings. Personally, this is the camera that I have ended up picking up every time that I've shot a wedding now, and it's so hard to shoot on everything else, and that's including the C70, which I have access to, GH5s, EOS Rs. I just gravitate towards the Komodo. And the reason for that is it's just such a pleasure to shoot on. Every time that I shoot on it, it just feels like it is helping the creative process rather than hindering it, which is huge. And so there are some setbacks. You need to know this camera, you need to know what you're working with, but all in all, I've found that this camera just has really, you know, elevated my work, and it's made it way more fun to you know, shoot these projects, shoot weddings, and it just seems like what I see on my monitor the day of is what will actually show up on my computer screen when I go to edit, and that is huge. When I've shot on pretty much any other camera, it feels like that's not the case. I feel like I have this image in my mind of what the image or the, you know, composition is going to look like, and in my head I'm like, wow, this is going to be amazing, and then I pull it up on the computer and I just pick the image apart. I can see I'm like, oh, this part was actually blown out, or, you know, I don't like the way that, you know, the skin tones look, and I have to end up doing all this work in post to try to get it to that place that I originally saw it looking like. Whereas with the Komodo, I can pretty much convert it to Rec 709. I'm like, yep, that's the way I saw it. That's the way that I wanted it to look. And yeah, you can make minor adjustments and take it even further than that, but man, straight out of camera, it just looks amazing. And that to me is huge. It saves me so much time. It saves me, you know, hours and hours of color grading, trying to get my footage back to where I originally saw it looking like. And so that's huge. And again, I just go to the Komodo every single time now for weddings, but make your own call. The Komodo probably is not for everyone. If you value, you know, convenience, the Komodo might not be the camera for you. If you just want to be able to, you know, switch quickly at any given moment between handheld and gimbal and tripod, it probably isn't the camera for you either. It does have limitations, but I would say that it's also such a joy to shoot on. And so try it out for yourself. You can probably rent it and try it out for a wedding, see if it's something that would work with your particular workflow or not. But hopefully this video has given you a couple reference points as to whether it's a good idea for you or not. Again, I hope this video has been helpful. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.